Hey guys, welcome in another episode, Little Bit of Life podcast with Little. I know that we did an episode, it was on February 10th. If you have not listened to it, definitely go and check it out. But we were talking about Red Hill, the overpouring amount of emails, of messages, of contact on social media. Every single one of you listeners said, I have never heard about this crisis happening. Where have we been? Was I not paying attention? And guess what? You were paying attention, but they just didn't talk about it. I promised you guys a part two. Not only did we speak in part one with Mandy, who was a family member that was affected by this, but now we have the powerhouse on. Her name is Kristina, and she is the attorney that is bringing this to light for not only the families, but to the entire world. Kristina, welcome on. How are you? I'm so excited to have you on. For those that are listening, we're going to just jump and dive right into the whole entire topic of Red Hill. How did you get connected to these families to assist them?
So I'm a survivor of toxic exposure myself, and CNBC did a story on my family, and it linked directly to my new website. I had just built the personal injury firm that I couldn't find for my own family. I called it Just Well, and someone saw that story and gave my name and phone number to a woman named Jamie Simic, and Jamie Simic was in her hospital bed, and she called me and said, I've been poisoned, can you help? And I started looking into it. I had actually, I knew about what happened at Red Hill because I had been advocating for military families. So I said, this is something I can do. I had just left the government. I was representing the United States in claims under the Federal Tort Claims Act. And I was like, this is a case against government. It's about toxic exposure. This I can do. And I started building a case.
Wow. With the government poisoning people in general, this isn't something that's new. This is something that's happened more often than not. Is that something you have experience in? Why is it not being talked about or shared?
It is true everywhere, right? If you're living and breathing, you've seen an ad for Camp Lejeune. This has happened before. At Camp Lejeune, the water was contaminated for decades. The government knew it. They allowed people to continue drinking the water. People sued at Camp Lejeune, but it was too late, and their claims were time barred. So Congress actually passed a law to allow people at Camp Lejeune to bring their claims. So what's happening at Red Hill right now is Camp Lejeune in real time, because it's highly unusual that you recognize you're being poisoned at the time. Often you learn a decade later, you get some notice like happened at Camp Lejeune, but here it was so bad that people could smell it in their sinks, and they caught the government red-handed.
And that's important, especially with the timing, because like you said, this is in real time. These cases are happening. And like in the episode on February 10th, these families, it's not just something that they had a cough or a cold or a fever. It is something that is long lasting. This happened in early of November of 2021, and these families are still suffering from this exposure.
And that's really important. When I flew over there the first time, I was trying to figure out who my local counsel was going to be. So I started talking to other lawyers in Hawaii, who's bringing these cases. And no one was bringing personal injury claims. They had some claims against the landlords, but no one was bringing a claim against the Navy. And I said, why not? And some of them I asked to be my local counsel, by the way, and they refused because they said, we understand that jet fuel comes in and out of your body, and these people are going to be fine. And I, being a survivor myself, Jamie was not fine. And she's an American hero. I mean, she was one of the first to stand up and say, this is not okay. And people are sick and they will get sick. She had been poisoned, by the way, in 2014, because there was a huge spill there in 2014 also. I stood up at this town hall with Jamie and people that Jamie invited. And I held up Wikipedia and I said, this is not rocket science. This is Wikipedia, people. And I believe that you are sick and I believe you're going to get sick. And I want to be in this with you. And, I think that really resonated with people because it was gaslighting at the highest levels. And gaslighting by their lawyers, by the way. That's why I'm the one at the table.
hmm Going against the military, going against the Navy. And like we talked about, this isn't something that's new, that this isn't the first time that this has happened. It seems to be a fear with so many people of, I'm going up against the government, I'm going to lose. So you coming in as this powerhouse and making this an opportunity of, you have to try. How is that taken in regards to the families that may have been a little skeptic or a little scared, getting full trust in you so quickly?
It's a great question. So people are still worried about that. They think we're taking on the United States of America. You can't do that. You know, I spoke on a podcast once, and it was actually a reel, but I had people reach out to me afterwards saying they were praying for my protection. But here's the thing. I'm not scared of it because this is actually what the law is designed for. The Federal Tort Claims Act allows people who are harmed by the negligence of the United States to bring a claim against the United States for the harm. It's a beautiful thing. This is what it's for, right?
Mm-hmm.
These were operator errors in May and November of 2021. The government has admitted that it was operator error. So there were particular people at particular times. And I saw that's the FTCA. That's what the FTCA is for. So I was really careful to limit our claims to that period of time and not make it grandiose. I didn't say this was the failure to maintain. I didn't say it was a failure to supervise. I didn't talk about huge systemic things. I talked about May and November of 2021. There were these spills caused by these people who violated the standard of care, and we have a claim. So I think this is what the Federal Tort Claims is designed for. And what's really interesting legally, I'm going to get all legal on you, but what's really interesting is I was worried. I thought that this was risky. Mm-hmm. And I thought that the government, and this is what I would have done if I were on their side, I thought that they were going to file a motion that said the government can provide water however they want. So they have the discretion to provide water the way they want. And that's what happened at Camp Lejeune. Some of those claims were dismissed because they were time barred, but some were dismissed because the government does have discretion. Mm-hmm. And I thought that it was risky because the government could say we have discretion. So I framed my whole complaint to avoid that defense and talk about what was mandatory, what was required, what was a breach. And the government did not move to dismiss the whole case. They filed a motion to narrow instead. And in their opening paragraph, they said, the Secretary of the Navy has admitted that this happened, that these spills happened and harmed the surrounding communities. And the United States is committed to resolving these claims. That's amazing. That's amazing. And I give so much credit to the lawyers on the other side because they are charged as working for DOJ, and I was too, working for the United States as a lawyer on that side. You're charged with doing the right thing. And that's what they're doing here. They're saying this caused harm and we're going to make amends. So now it's a question of when and how much, and are you going to recognize the extent of the harm?
Mm-hmm. How many families are you representing? Because we know it was such a mass of hitting not only just military families, but we talked to a lot of locals in that area as well, over 100,000 people. How many families are you representing in this case?
So I'm representing 450 or so, 1,600 people. So I want to know, where are the other 90? There are 93,000 people on that water line. Where are the other 91,000? Mm-hmm. And look, I have enough clients. It's not like I need to go gen up more clients or I'm looking for more cash or anything. But I don't want to leave those people behind because they might not know that they have a claim. And this is their right under the Federal Tort Claims Act to bring a claim. And they're not going to be able to do it 10 years from now. I think some of them think, well, if I get cancer, I'll bring a claim. Mm-hmm. You can't. You're going to be time barred because you knew about it now. So there's a deadline of November of 2023, which is coming up. And if you don't file by November 2023, you're out of luck. And by the way, I'm only going to take cases until I settle the claims. And we're already talking settlement. So, if you don't do it now, you're not going to be able to be compensated for the harm. And I just hate that because I really do believe that these people were harmed, whether they have symptoms or not, because we've seen what happened at Camp Lejeune. We know that these people are going to be at risk of long-term harm. And they should be compensated for that.
Mhm. Have you received any negative feedback or comments, or, I mean, going with a case that is of this magnitude? I mean, we know how certain cases work, and when you're kind of, that person showing and presenting the evil in the world, it seems to always just come at you and be your fault. So, have you had kickback from residents or military members or the government or all in between?
Oh, sure. I mean, when I went over there the first time, they decided that I was a homophobe, that I was an anti-vaxxer. And I mean, I started the LGBT group in my high school. I'm vaccinated myself. Like, they were just throwing stuff at me. But I will say that when I continued to show up over and over and over again, and when we were able to change the narrative and say people really are sick, this was not short-term harm, people are actually sick, people noticed and they started to trust me. And I am really proud of the camaraderie we've developed with the Native Hawaiian people. There's a group called the Oahu Water Protectors, and the Sierra Club also there are very plugged into the local community. And it was important to me to recognize that Native Hawaiians have been ringing the bell for a really long time. They have been sounding the alarm. And this is not a new issue. This is not me coming in my cowboy boots and recognizing it for the first time. This is something that they have been fighting about and speaking up about for decades now. We have been poisoning that island for decades. And they have been there all along. So I'm really proud that I was able to gain their trust. Now, there are others, right, including other lawyers who are, they're just going to be mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're just going to be mean. And they're going to say things. I'm sure you get this too, right? You're young, you're female. They're going to say things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet you get that, right? I bet people say, like, you don't know what you're doing, lady.
Yep.
Then you kind of sit there and you think, and at first you're like, oh man, maybe I don't. And then you start thinking about it and you're like, that lawyer who's saying that, have they ever worked for the government? Do they know anything about the Federal Tort Claims Act? And how many clients do they have again?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right? And like, that might be how you think, right? Like, oh, that person who's throwing stones, like, how many followers do they have again? And how many followers do you have? So, so you have to be really like rooted in yourself and not just in yourself, right? But in something bigger. This case is bigger than me. And it was fate or divine intervention that led me to this case. And I think I'm exactly the lawyer they need. Mm-hmm. My particular background. So I'm going to tune out the rest of the noise and carry on.
Mm-hmm. When you go with such massive topics, you're almost alienated from everything that you seem to know and think, because you're going up against something that, just like this podcast, it's what we seem to think but don't say. We live in an environment where we always think something, but we're almost too afraid to go out and actually push the buttons and see what can happen and to promote change. And the only way that we promote change and get justice, especially for something like this, is to step out of the box. And there's a difference between right and wrong. I think what really amazed me in the February 10th episode, talking to Mandy, and that's what I loved about even just already this episode. The key thing is you showed up. There's no government officials that are going to talk with these people. Our own president went over there. Our vice president is vacationing there. And it's just if I don't see it, it's not happening. But that's the problem, is so many people are showing up, but they're still silencing the families. And you have become that powerhouse of a voice of saying, you know what, I'm putting myself out there and I'm talking about it. And that's okay that we talk about it, because this is happening and the Navy needs to be held responsible.
Well, and what I really learned early on is that this is not about me. This is about my clients. So I passed them the mic. I introduced them to the press. I held these town halls. I invited the press and I passed the mic to my clients, because the government was hosting town halls where no one was. Even today, they're hosting town halls where people in the audience are not given the mic. How is that a town hall? Right? That's not a town hall.
No.
In fact, I went to one. I went to a government town hall that was like that. And I stood up and I looked at the room and I commanded the attention of the room. And I said, Rear Admiral Wade, he's the head of the Joint Task Force for Red Hill. You have a mic there. And you said that you wanted to come and listen to families. I'm sitting here with a table full of affected families. Will you pass them the mic for just 1 minute to tell their story? Because they came to tell their story to you so that you could hear it from them. And he refused to give them the mic. Mind blown, mind blown. So I'm going to go back at the end of March and I'm going to hold town halls again and I'm going to pass them the mic. And now we're doing it more of as a conversation style. And they're just they've been gaslit for so long that they're so happy to meet one another and to hear each other's stories. And I take out that Wikipedia article and I read the symptoms at the bottom. And I say, how many of you have experienced gastrointestinal problems? And they raise their hand. How many of you have experienced respiratory problems? They raise their hand. It's like the entire room. And it's not just to one problem, it's to multiple problems. Everyone has had multiple problems. And the CDC recognizes that 80% of people still report to be sick over a year later. And they're only going to get sicker, right? And especially if we don't treat them. That's the thing that I care a lot about, because my firm's just well, because I literally want people to get well. I want to get well. My husband came up with the name because that's when we were going through it. That's what I kept saying. I just want to be well. And that's what I want for my clients. So we talked early about how do you get the right medical care? I introduced them to doctors. I had doctors on calls. When someone came forth with a doctor that had been good for them, I introduced them to everybody else. I convened doctors so that the doctors would speak to each other, right? Because they weren't getting the medical care they needed. When you get poisoned by Exxon, you don't have to go to Exxon for your care. But these military families were poisoned by the Navy and then expected to go to the Navy for care. It's not surprising that the Navy screwed up their care, right? This is not rocket science.
When Mandy was on, we were talking about how they created a Red Hill clinic. And I do this because it's a joke. I worked in the medical field for so long. You are constantly calling. You get a customer service representative that doesn't even know what Red Hill is for. So they're taking these families to jump through hoop upon hoop when they're already sick. They're already trying to find care. They're already trying to find someone who understands them, listens to them, and believes them. Because those are three completely different things when it comes to having exposure. Her and I talked, and she's like, even following her on Instagram and, communicating constantly. I'm like, how is your husband? Going through trials and every single test possible. And she's like, I'm starting to wonder if we're crazy. We're not getting help. We're suffering. And it amazes me, like when she said there's a clinic, and in my head, as a civilian, I'm like, oh, that's great. But when you hear about these steps, it's a waste of time. It's not even care that's being provided to these families.
I call it fake. Like there are these fake town halls, and this is a fake clinic. Literally it's the same doctors, except now it's Tuesday and Thursday mornings. No new place, no new funding, no new specialists, same doctors, same place, particular times. That is not a clinic. And if you call, like you said, you got transferred to the mainland to these nurses who had no idea, spent hours to make an appointment. And then when they went to the appointment, same doctors, again, that they'd seen before, and same refusal to give them the basic labs. That's what we've said all along, like give them just basic labs, CBC count, liver function, kidney function, thyroid. We know what issues to look for. In the military system, there's an occupational and environmental medicine division in each military facility. Those divisions have been off limits to Red Hill families. So they have environmental specialists. They're just not using them.
Did they give a reason as to why?
Yeah, because, and this is fair, by the way, I have no problem with this. It's typically for occupational medicine, occupational work. So you get exposed to jet fuel as a tech working on planes. right? We know how to treat jet fuel exposure in the military. We have an entire Air Force, right? This is not new. And so it's fine that occupational medicine treats people who have been exposed through occupations. That's okay. But in this case, make those specialists available to the people who've also experienced jet fuel poisoning, and don't refuse to treat them, So Mandy's a great example, because Mandy went in herself, and I don't talk about clients' health publicly, but she's given me permission, and she's public about it. So she goes in, and she's suffering from jet fuel poisoning. Everyone knows what it is, right? Because they could smell it, and everyone who was there was exposed. There's no question about that. So she's there. She gets heavy metal testing, all of her labs. She's given everything under the sun. Her husband and her kids go in same weekend, not a single lab. And then the government had the audacity to go back to those medical records and put in that they had COVID. And none of them had COVID. No COVID test, right? But there's some shady stuff going on.
And for listeners that may be listening, they listen to February 10th and they're like, this is normal behavior. This is just the stuff that you don't hear about. And it's on purpose that you don't hear about it. So posting and talking about this stuff and sharing, that's the most important thing, is to share. The more you continue to share these stories, the bigger it's going to get, the more attention it's going to get. But that's putting the pressure on where it needs to go. And these families, it's all ages. It's not just adults that are being affected. There's young children, similar to all these other past exposures, that are suffering. And like you said, this is long-term health conditions that are so unknown, and they're just getting cycled through of, let's try this, let's try that. We've been there before. We've seen this before.
But imagine if we could get them the right care now. We can change the trajectory of their life. I didn't have to bring a med mal claim. Like, I didn't have to accuse the government of medical negligence. I could have stopped at poisoning. And most other lawyers would. But to me, I wanted to make the point, it's not just that you poisoned these people. It's that you then refuse to treat them. Mm-hmm. And now is the time, because we need to monitor their base labs. Patrick Fine went to the hospital this year and in incredible intense pain. And he had surgery, and he's had a bunch of surgeries, but crazy intense pain. And the doctor said, well, where are your labs from when you were admitted the first time? Well, they didn't do any labs. Mm-hmm. There's no baseline. So now we're taking the baseline it makes no sense. But I really believe that if these people get compensation to get the right care, it can change the trajectory of their life. And they need to get out of the health system, the military health system, right? They have to get out, because they have not been treated in that system. They have to get out. And once they get out, they can find good integrative doctors. And there are great doctors. I mean, we have great doctors that we know of who are already treating patients. The Cleveland Clinic has both an integrative and a traditional medicine approach. So it's all integrated. So there are ways to do this if we can just get people to the right care.
Mm-hmm. In the future, to make this stop happening, what do you think it's going to take for this to actually change, get people's attention, and hold people accountable?
Well, that's what this lawsuit is all about, right? I mean, our clients want to make sure this never happens again. And I'll tell you, when we filed this complaint, it changed the tone, because it was long, and it was detailed, and it was families who, it wasn't just one member of the family was sick, it was the whole family that was sick. You can't read those stories in the complaint and think that it's fake. Mm-hmm. And the senators read it, right? And then suddenly the senators are reacting in a different way, because they're recognizing that people are truly sick. But it's not just illness. This has affected people in other ways too. I mean, financially, the government moved people out of these houses, and then they moved them back in without clearing the houses. And what I mean by that is, they flush the houses by just having these Marines go in and turn on the water. And they flush the jet fuel directly into the lawns. So that house isn't safe. Mm-mm. They didn't clean the air. They didn't come in with gaskets and charcoal. They didn't install a water filtration system. All things that they've done at the Air Force Base in Alaska. Once again, we know how to do this. They've done it elsewhere in this country, but for whatever reason, they refused here. So they cleared these houses by neighborhood, and they forced people to move back in because they cut off their alternative expenses. So they just moved people back in. And so people immediately got sick again. And yes, if you're Mandy Fine, you just call up the Secretary of the Navy and you say, get me the F off this island, right? And you eventually get to the right person, you get off. Well, if you're enlisted or the spouse of someone who's enlisted, you can't do that.
You're stuck.
You're stuck. You're stuck in the house that made you sick. So I'm upset about, it's one thing to poison people. And that will happen. Look, it's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. But it is quite another to hang the people out to dry, to force them to move back into the homes that made them sick, to force them to stay in those homes, to refuse to even change their water heater. These are people who've given their life for our country, and we can't change their water heater. Mm-hmm. And don't get me started about the civilians. I mean, we were even worse with the civilians. We didn't even tell them that they were poisoned until weeks later.
I lived on the island of Oahu, and meeting the locals, the land is so sacred to them. And it's something that has been handed out for hundreds of years. They live off the land. The water is a prized possession to them, and their land comes first and their families come first. So the fact that these civilians that are living there are poisoned, I feel like, even talking to so many of them, they're like, we're forgotten and we're still stuck here. We don't have anywhere to go. We don't have any help. All of our finances have been to where can we relocate? Because a lot of families live together. They live in what we call pods. They have, generations of families living together, helping each other, leaning on each other. So when it affects an entire family, there's no option for them to go somewhere else. That's all that they have.
And I have 2 clients who I'm thinking of who left the land and came to the mainland. Now, imagine the trauma for that family, right? And the cost, the financial devastation of, you're basically like a refugee, right? You're arriving in a new state because you're coming from an island. So you can't just move with like a U-Haul, right? It's not like a U-Haul situation. This is airplanes, right?
Yeah.
Ships. And you move to the mainland, and you left your for Native Hawaiians to leave their homeland and to leave their people because they felt like it wasn't safe there is really extraordinary. And having lived there, there's one aquifer. So yes, the spills that I'm talking about affected one well, and those 93,000 people were on that one well. But we know it's also affected the aquifer. No question that it has affected the aquifer, and that aquifer is not going to be clean for generations. So they only have the water is everything to them because they only have one aquifer. And when you run out of water on an island, what do you do?
There's no options.
You can't it from another state. You can't pump it from another town next door.
For those that might be listening, and this podcast is shared all over the world, and I'm so grateful. If you're listening in another continent, you're like, you know what? My opinion doesn't matter. Me sharing this does not matter. We are all interconnected. Just in sharing a story and finding Mandy on Facebook and just conversating, I have had over 60 families email me and say, we didn't feel like we had a voice. We feel like just because it's on the media for maybe a couple minutes that we're forgotten about. So every time you share this story, you're keeping it alive and you're being that voice for a family that may feel that they are forgotten. And that's why we're doing this today. It is so important to help families. We grew up, all of us know the difference between right and wrong. If somebody is in need, you step up and help them. And so by having all of us interconnected, we can help so many families, even by just sharing or keeping this story alive. It's helping so many people that are stuck on this island with no other options.
Yeah, that's giving me goosebumps because with my own kids, I have 4 kids. And we talk about when bad things happen, look for the helpers. And I took my daughter to the 9/11 museum and I said, it's going to be really sad in there, but I want you to look for the helpers. I'm from Manhattan, so like that was a big deal for us. And we left the 9/11 museum and she looked at me and she said, Mommy, a lot of people died, but there were so many more helpers. And that's, when I look at, I can get on my high horse about all the people who failed here, right? There's the Captain Spitzer who told people that they should keep drinking the water and the water was safe. And he and his men were drinking it, right? I mean, I can get on my high horse about them, or I can focus on those who are helping the people. And, Sophie Koch is a phenomenal reporter on the island she's the one who discovered that the government had thrown out all the test results. So the government took tests at people's houses and then discarded the samples. So just heroic work, right? People who are working at the top of their field. Kristina Scurry is another reporter there. But the Sierra Club, the Oahu Water Protectors. There's the Board of Water Supply. The guy who runs that is Ernie Lau. And he has also been sounding this alarm for a long time. And he'll hold hearings and he'll force the EPA to come and he'll force the Department of Health to come. I mean, we marched with the people of Oahu when we were there last time. And it was a march for and with Ernie Lau. And it was led by Ernie Lau, the head of the Board of Water Supply. I mean, there are heroes in this story. Mandy Fine is a hero. Jamie Simick's a hero. And, they happen to be ones that were out early. But I'm telling you, every one of my mama clients or daddy clients are heroes, right? Mm-hmm. They are fighting for their families. They are moving heaven and earth to get their families to safety. And along the way, right, they're helping others. Like Mandy Fine's on here with you while she's sick, right? She told me when I had a chance to visit with her recently that on December 16th, she went and talked to the officer and she was speaking for families and she was sitting there in Depends. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like that's the kind of heroism I'm talking about. I mean, Jamie Simick was in her hospital bed calling reporters because in Jamie Simick's world, the truth must come out. And, those are American heroes. I'm just honored to meet them, honestly. I'm just honored to help them. And it's a special thing to show my own kids, right? That we can use the bad things that happen to our family. Those things allow us to empathize more with the people we serve now. And, they get to see their mommy using something that was really hard for the good of others now.
What do you think the future of Red Hill looks like?
Well, I think that they're going to defuel the tanks, but in the process of defueling the tanks, they already spilled PFAS, right? I don't know if you know that, but PFAS is a forever chemical. They spilled PFAS while they were trying to run drills about how to defuel. So that shows their level of competence. So I'm worried about that. I'm very worried about that. And I'm worried about the people of Oahu. And I think the story can't end here. And I think the story for these affected families and affected people needs to continue because sadly, this is only the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I appreciate you coming on and speaking with us. I know you're extremely busy. I was so honored to have you on and talk about this because I feel like it really connects all of us when we hear, a family, we hear about Mandy and we hear about all of the bad, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between with her health journey that's just beginning. Mm-hmm. But it was also amazing to have you on so we can really understand that one, this is happening a lot. We just don't know about it. And two, for those that are listening, if you are on Oahu and you're like, I'm just really scared, I'm just really nervous, there is someone here that will help you, but the time is starting to run out. There is a clock that everyone is watching, but that she's watching for you and watching for your family. So definitely listen, share this out, and just know that the time is running up, but we still have quite a little bit of time, that more people have a voice. They're not silenced, and you are heard, you are appreciated, and most of all, you are respected. For not only those that are in the military family, but for the civilians, you definitely matter, even though you feel like you're silenced right at home.
That's beautiful. Thank you for having me.